I want to give some recognition before I get started this morning. If you're a board of director, can you stand up? If you are currently on the board of directors, please stand up. So these people work tirelessly for no money for this association constantly, so they deserve a lot of credit. I also want to introduce our committee chairs. If you're a committee chair, can you please stand up? Thank you. We've got some committees this year: Education, Rec, YPN, doing some truly amazing things. So thank you for being here. Appreciate it. And lastly, I want to thank the staff that makes this happen in the morning. So first off, we have Janessa Mercer. Over here, stand up, Janessa. Wave. Gabe and Desiree, I'm going to make you come out of your hole for a minute. So can you both come out here and wave to everyone? Gabe and Desiree, are you there? There they are. Gabe is our Director of Operations, and Desiree is our Director of Communications. They're what makes all this happen for our live stream. So thank you, too. Appreciate it. So can anybody tell me, what is the value of this association to you? I want to raise a hand. Can somebody just tell me shortly, what's the value of this association? The members. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Community. Members. MLS, absolutely. Anybody else? Education, perfect. So we do a lot of things as an association, right? So we have the task of educating our members, making them more professional, enforcing a strict code of ethics, access to the MLS and all the technology that goes along with that. But over all else, what we do is we advocate for home ownership. And when I was a government affairs director, I found that it was difficult to get that message across. So this isn't just about politics. So what I would do as a government affairs director is I would get up and I would talk about some bills, legislation, and I'd look around the room and I'd get a lot of blank stares, some people falling asleep. Nobody was quite connecting it to what they actually do in their day-to-day lives. But advocating for home ownership is exactly what we do. It's the priority of this association, really over all else. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that this morning. We're going to talk about some economic data here locally, and then what we do with that, how that translates into what we do from a policy standpoint, and what you do in your business, what we need you for. So I hope everybody can see the screens okay. Is it showing up on the back screen there? Okay. All right, so in terms of where we are currently locally, so we as an association are in kind of a strange geographic location. We overlap essentially 3 counties. Now, while we're primarily in Riverside County here in Corona, we also represent agents up in Rancho Cucamonga and Chino. We represent agents in Anaheim Hills and Yorba Linda. And so in order to do an analysis of our association, you really have to look at 3 counties. And so in terms of what we're looking at with median sales price, things have changed, as you've probably seen in your business, pretty drastically since September. The line on the chart that you see there, that light blue line, is where we are as an association. That's where our members are doing business. And so you can see in Orange County, 6.6% drop since last September. Riverside County, 2.3%. San Bernardino had the lowest drop at just under a percentage point. But there's definitely been a shift in the market, and it's I'm sure that you've noticed it again in doing your business. What's happened is we've seen us go from a drastic seller's market that was really unsustainable to a little bit of a balanced market. And in February, some of the numbers changed even more, so we'll see that just ahead here. Okay, so in terms of some of the cities that we represent, so you saw where the Inland Gateway was at. So Rancho Cucamonga unusually dropped 5.5%. Now that's similar to what we saw in Orange County with a 6% drop in Orange County. So what seems to happen in these economic fluctuations is you start with the coast, and then you move inland. And so what happens at the coast, in all likelihood, will happen inland sometime in the near future, but not necessarily, and we'll see that as well. Median days on market. So this is really a good analysis of where we are in terms of demand and where we are in terms of supply. So last year we were at record lows. I mean, you were seeing like it shows there in Riverside County, 34 days on market, San Bernardino 29 days, and the Inland Gateway, our agents were seeing 21 days on market last year, this time in February, and that actually dipped a little bit in the summer. Now we've almost doubled, and so all three counties were up to the 40s in terms of days on market, and that really is an indicator of the shift that we're seeing. In terms of new listings that are coming into the market, so in a second we'll look at active listings, but in terms of what's actually coming in to the inventory, again, another drop. So our members have seen a 25.7% drop. Now that may be an indication of the kind of real estate that most of our members practice, maybe a little bit different, but regardless, across all three counties, we're seeing a drop in new listings. We're seeing a drop in demand if you look at pending sales, most of which is, again, Orange County at 58.3%. And that started really last August, maybe September. And then we're now seeing that drift here in the Inland Empire early this year. Active listings. So this is our inventory number. In terms of active listings over a 10-year span, you can see the drastic drop in inventory. In Riverside County, we're looking at a 61% drop in inventory. I know some of you that have been in the business a long time probably remember a time when listings were easy to come by. That's simply not the case anymore, even with the market shift. Last year, I'm sure many of you struggled to find listings, and that's why. The biggest reduction is, of course, in the entry-level pricing. So anything under $330,000 in these three counties, we've seen as much as an 81% drop. So trying to get into the market as a millennial, I happen to be an older millennial, but we often there's a there's a reputation out there that we tend to live with our parents. I don't. I have 2 kids and have a house, I promise. But reason being is because you can't afford to rent or buy a house anywhere. And so the market is drastically different than what it was 10 years ago, if not longer. So kind of a look at where we are in the three counties in terms of affordability. Median income in 2018 in Riverside County, you can see, is $69,000, and that number we'll come back to later. But the affordability number is the important one there, 43.8%. That's an uptick of 4% in the last 5 years, annual payments of $30,000. And so that affordability factor really hasn't been an issue here much in the past. It's becoming more and more of an issue. San Bernardino County, same thing, a little bit of an uptick. And then, of course, Orange County. In Orange County, actually, the average person uses 65% of their income. I'm not sure why that didn't show up. They use 65% of their income to pay for housing. In Riverside and San Bernardino County, we're more in the 42 to 43% range. But again, housing is occupying more and more of people's disposable income, and that's having impact elsewhere in the economy. I promise I didn't mean to be depressing this morning. It's just when you're dealing with things from an advocacy standpoint, you're dealing with the data, sometimes you have to look for the problems. Now we're going to look at a couple numbers that are good as well, but just want you to be aware of that. Home Purchase Sentiment Index, this is from Fannie Mae. They take a number of numbers, including interest rates, demand, you name it, and they plug it into a formula. And so you can see the home purchase sentiment is still pretty high compared to what it was historically, but we've definitely seen a drop from 2017 to 2018, indicating that shift. Government shutdown did have a small impact on what we're seeing in the market locally. Now, about 75% of NAR members said there was no impact, but there is that 25% that said there was an impact, and the biggest reason for that was the economic uncertainty. Anytime there's economic uncertainty, people get scared. If they were on the verge, they decide not to go for it and wait a little while. And so there was a little bit of an impact there, and we saw some of that in the numbers in February. All right, so this is the big number. If you're going to look at nothing else that I present you today, I want you to look at this one. This is according to the U.S. Census, the owner-occupied rate since 2010. Now, in every other economic boom that we've had in this country, at least in the last 100 years, it's corresponded with an increase in home ownership. Especially in the 60s and 70s, Home ownership, as I usually say, was responsible for the largest redistribution of wealth in American history. It's the easiest way for somebody to move up the economic ladder. Unfortunately, even though it's not much, nationwide, statewide, and then here locally in our 3 counties, we keep seeing that number tick down. Now, I will say the caveat to that is we did see a slight uptick last year. But generally, there's a trend downward, and it's very unusual for a booming economy. And so it's concerning because in California in particular, as you can see in 2017, 54.5%, we are this close to becoming a renter state. Now, there's nothing wrong with renters. I rented for a long time. That's great. But in terms of the big picture, it's much harder, again, for people to move up that economic ladder. And so younger generations are not accumulating wealth as fast as older generations did. In fact, on the whole, the pool of wealth is much smaller with millennials than it was in previous generations. And this is definitely one of the factors there. So why is it falling? Now, this is a bit of a mess of a chart here, so bear with me for a second. The primary reason that we're seeing these disproportionately high prices, which is the biggest factor to that home ownership rate, is low inventory. So for the last 10 years, California has been about 65,000 units a year behind. I'm sorry, that's the last 20 years. And so we've been behind pace. The estimate now is that we're about 3.5 million homes behind where we should be for that supply-demand curve to level off and for people to be able to find housing. I mean, you can look down the street, you see increased homeless population, you have people living multiple families to a place, and this is the factor here. So even in a booming economy, people can't find a place to live. Yep.
Yeah, not to interrupt you, but
Sure.
in LA County, we saw a spike in building over there, but they were building things people didn't want to buy. High density projects along the railroad corridor, and
Sure.
They were building luxury homes. And so even though there was a spike, and that's happening across the state, we're not building what it is people want to buy right now, and that's part of the challenge also.
Yeah, so there's some challenges there. You bring up a good point. That actually brings me to the next point there. You can see in California, it costs $50,000 to $70,000 more to build a home than it does anywhere else in the country. And so when you're talking to developers about what he just mentioned in terms of, okay, I see them building, there's a lot of luxury apartments going up. I don't necessarily see the more affordable options or the home ownership options. Reason being is this all has to pencil out for developers. This is a business for them. And so when you're talking about $50,000 to $70,000 more expensive, and that's creeping up, especially with having to have solar panels on homes now, for instance, it's very difficult for developers to pencil that out. Oftentimes they can only do that with luxury apartments. And usually it's luxury apartments that are below 5 stories, because below 5 stories you can use wood. You don't have to use steel beams. And so there's a lot of economic factors at play in terms of what they build. Now, what we'll say is all supply is good supply, but yes, there are areas of the market that need more than others, and that's especially true at that entry level. We've obviously had historically low interest rates that have kept prices somewhat inflated because it makes purchasing a little bit more affordable. And so that there's a balance there between sales price and low interest rates. And then all cash sales. All cash sales in some of these counties make up as much as 30% of purchases. And that's up from somewhere around 6 to 7% 10 years ago. And so those units are typically being converted to rentals. We're seeing kind of a switch back a little bit now. I know some of you that are property owners may have sold some of your property. There has been a little bit of shift lately, but still that number reigns true. And then, of course, the other factor there is diminishing tax incentives. You all remember when we were having our tax reform fight, we saw a reduction in the mortgage interest deduction. We saw a cap on state and local tax deduction, SALT, at $10,000. And so while doesn't seem like much, it is a chunk of our coastal market. And what that can do for that overall owner-occupied rate, that home ownership rate, that can take that down a percentage point or two. And again, even though that doesn't seem that much, that can be devastating in terms of our long-term home ownership. The other factors at play, the average student now that graduates is paying $393 a month in student loan payments. I know I'm paying a lot more than that. And our national debt, because of tax reform, has accelerated. We're now up to $21 trillion. And what that's doing is it's putting pressure on inflation. And I think in the coming years, we're going to see some of the damage from that. Okay, so this is one of the most telling charts that I have over the last 10 years. So in the red there, you can see average income. And in the blue, you can see the average sales price of a home. It's not even close. Now, my numbers stop in 2017 because that's where the census stops. We have seen an uptick in income recently, thankfully, but it's obviously much too slow and not keeping up with the market, so risk factors there. In Riverside, San Bernardino, Ontario region, this is according to NAR, 5% down, you need about $89,000 to purchase a home here, 10%, $83,000, and 20%, $74,000. I know some of you that are in loans probably would challenge those numbers. Now you can get somebody in, but regardless, average region income is $67,000. So you can see there's a huge discrepancy there between what people are making and what they can actually afford. What it forces is people to be in dual income relationships, even if they don't want to. So you see a lot of that. You see a lot of Right, exactly. Okay, so another chart to display kind of the how behind we are in terms of building. You can see in the red there, that's sort of the gap into where we are and where we should be. Here in Riverside County, what year was this? This was 2010 to 2015. We added about 105 new jobs, but only built 31,000 new units, and so you can see what's happening there. National historic interest rates, you can see our lowest point was 2015. We have had an uptick since then, and we're going to continue to do so. The Fed has raised rates 9 times since 2015, and so that's going to continue to put pressure on what people can afford. Now here's the good news. The economy's good. You can see U.S. GDP growth keeps accelerating. In 2018, we averaged 3% growth, and it looks like our 2019 numbers so far are on pace. So the economy is doing well. The problem is some are being left behind. A lot of it is because of these pressures on home ownership. Solution, build more housing, but traffic. So you can see here in terms of commuting time, the biggest chokes for the Inland Empire are the 57 and 60 connection there, and then the 91 freeway. You can see the annual hours of delay per commuter in this area is 59, cost $1,300 a year to people that are commuting. And you'll see just a second here.
Does that include the Diamond Link?
Yeah. So Riverside commute time, you can see on average, that number has ticked up. We're now at 33 minutes, 10 seconds on average in terms of what people commute. That's, again, the average. Okay, so what's happening is people are commuting outward. So you can see here, in Riverside and San Bernardino County, only about 46% of residents stay here for work. The rest of them leave. In Orange County, those numbers are up to 64%, so the vast majority of Orange County residents are staying where they are to work. And so what we need is we need a little bit of an exchange here. The solution, yes, is to build more housing. You can't do so when you have these chokes on traffic. So what you need to do is bring business to the Inland Empire. You bring business to the Inland Empire, people work closer to home, they don't have to commute. It's better for the environment. It has kind of a residual effect, if you will. So the problem is that the kinds of businesses that we're adding here aren't necessarily what's going to attract those commuters that are currently working out of the county. What people want in a neighborhood, these are those millennial buyers that I talked about. 65% of people want a short commute to work. They like to, I think they call it the 18-hour city. People my age like to live in a place. I happen to live in downtown Brea, and it's a little bit like this. They still want a single-family home with a yard, but you want to be close to things. You want to be able to go out for a drink or a meal. You want good schools, and you don't want to work too far from home. There's cities around the country that are kind of testing this as an attraction to younger generations. And as of this week, millennials make up the largest portion of buyers of any generation. And so this stuff is going to start coming more and more into play. So the types of jobs that the Inland Empire is adding are primarily distribution and transportation and construction. You've all seen the big Amazon building as you head up to Rancho. So there's a lot of that's being added here. Unfortunately, there's some pressures on that. So what that does, distribution, obviously you need trucks. And so from a policy standpoint, we're starting to see the AQMD and some other state organizations indicating that they're going to be putting increased pressure on truckers, distribution centers, things like that in order to reduce our greenhouse gas numbers. And so growth in that area is going to be somewhat restricted. Construction is also booming. That was held back, unfortunately, for so long because we weren't building enough. Now we're finally catching up, so those jobs are coming in. And as of now, because there's such a worker shortage, they're relatively high-paying jobs. Okay, so the businesses that you need, the people that are actually commuting out, are in this area here. You can see professional management, finance, insurance, real estate, and information. In Los Angeles and Orange County, those three segments make almost double the salary. And so that's clearly what people are leaving for. So that's the type of business you want to bring in. So in terms of Silicon Valley, some of the tech companies, finance companies like Deloitte, a lot of those that you have in Orange County, it's the type of businesses that we need to attract here in order to keep people here. Construction, distribution, those are great for the economy. There's nothing wrong with those. But if we want to solve the traffic problem, solve our housing supply problem, these are the areas that we need to be working on. So solutions, again, recruit information, finance, tech jobs to the IE, continue to improve infrastructure, add alternative forms of transit, and of course build more housing, especially at the entry level. Some of the prohibitors there, now these can be a little bit circular. Companies go to a workforce, so you have to have an educated workforce. If a company like, for instance, Amazon or Google wanted to come to the Inland Empire, it would be a challenge because there's not a sufficient supply of workers here. Workforce also goes to companies. They're commuting to these other areas to go to those companies. So there's a little bit of a catch-22 there that makes it difficult to attract. Air quality. Riverside and San Bernardino counties have the worst air quality in the entire state. San Bernardino County had 126 red days last year, and Riverside County had 84. It's not our fault. Most of the smog comes in from Los Angeles, given the stream. But it is a problem. It's a deterrent for people that want to live here, for companies that want to move here. So it's something that lawmakers are going to have to take a look at. And of course, red tape and NIMBYs. We talked about $50,000 to $70,000 number. You also have the situation here where people just simply don't want anything in their backyard. They don't want that apartment complex, as nice as it may be, down the street, bringing more people into their neighborhood. So there's a lot of that, and unfortunately, it's something you have to deal with.
Tony, what's a NIMBY?
Not in my backyard.
I have enough in my backyard.
So for you, some of the takeaways here: keep your listings price reasonable, given the market shift. Get involved in local economic development, directly affects your business, and know this stuff. It adds value and professionalism to your business. I want to emphasize those last two because I think when we talk about advocacy, you get a blank stare oftentimes, but advocacy is not just Donald Trump. It's not just politics. Advocacy is getting involved in your local cities, getting involved in your chambers of commerce, helping recruiting businesses. Here in downtown Corona, we have the Corona Mall is going to be taken over by a great developer and transformed. Getting involved in the process down here, it not only helps the area, helps prices, keeps value up, provides more housing for people, but again, that translates into you getting more listings. It translates into you knowing about your neighborhood. So if somebody asks you about your neighborhood, your value is increased because you know that development's going in down the street. You know what business is coming in. And so it's important to know this stuff. And that's what I want to emphasize. Unfortunately, there's a little bit of a disconnect with realtors, and in every other industry group, you have a lot of participation when it comes to advocacy. We don't have as much so in the realtor group. We have a ton of members, and so there's a lot of participation, but the vast majority of members know nothing about what we do in this realm. And that really is unique to our industry, and I think it's because we haven't done a good job of sending this message. So with that, that's all I have for you this morning. And if anybody has any questions, now's the time. And I can answer questions about the association too, not just about, yeah.
Great presentation, by the way, right on target.
Oh, thanks.
Forecasting future. Seems
Sure.
like everybody kind of stays away from that. What are you looking at next year?
Next year. Well, you know, I don't pretend to be an economist. I use the numbers to do our best analysis of what we need to do here as an association. I don't know that there is a good opinion on what's going to happen over the next 2 years. You know, most people say that, most economists that I've read say that we're still about a year away from our next recession, at least. But there's so much uncertainty now that you just don't know. The volatility in the stock market has been crazy over the last 3 months. And so there's a lot of factors out there. There's bubbles like student loan debt, national debt. So we'll see. I think for the next year or so, you'll probably see things churn along just fine. We've seen drops early this year that are abnormal in terms of the off-season drops. It's been more significant. And so our spring and summer seasons might be a little slower than they were before, but I still think you'll see a little bit of growth, if not leveling off. But over the next 2 or 3 years, I'm not sure. We will have in 2 weeks, I'll say we'll have a professor from Chapman University, and he's an economist. He's going to be here to do an economic forecast for us, so he'll be able to go into some of the detail that I didn't go into this morning. So, Larry, yeah.
Your slide presentation will be on the website?
It is currently, actually. You know, I think I forgot to mention that. Desiree reminded me before I got up here. But if you go on the website, igrealtors.org or tigar.org, they both get you to the same place. On the very front page there is a picture link, I'm told, to our PowerPoint presentation, so you can grab it from there. Any other questions? Yep.
I have a question in regards to the tax reform, as far as having more deduct.
Yeah.
It's gonna affect the home ownership as far as why should I rent versus buy?
Right.
And also, like for the only pushing to not have mortgage deduction. What's your forecast, what's your feeling?
Yeah, so her question was the impacts of tax reform, pushes to reduce some mortgage interest deduction and cap SALT, and what are those impacts on the market. So there's, whenever you're talking about the impacts on the market, most people go, well, that's not going to affect me. I'll still buy anyway. But there's that gray area, right? There's those people that are on the verge that are $200 or $300 a month away from being able to purchase a $500,000 home or whatever it may be, right? And that's where you see that effect. You might see 5 to 10% of people that are more scared or they fall out of escrow because of these things than they would before. So with the mortgage interest deduction and the cap on SALT, you're typically talking about people that own homes higher than like $550,000, $600,000. In this region, that's a little bit of a smaller percentage, but we're neighbors to 2 major regions where that's a huge percentage. And so the impact on the economy has sort of a trickle-down effect. Apologies to anybody that doesn't like trickle-down economics, but just a reference. Yeah.
Talks about the salt kind of being rolled back a little bit starting in 2020.
So the NAR is pushing to tie both numbers, or tie the mortgage interest deduction to inflation, and raise SALT. The first order of business is to raise it for couples, because what happened was, because it's taxed at $10,000, it's essentially a marriage penalty. And so if you have 2 incomes, you're married, you own a bigger property, you're more hurt. So what they want to do for married couples is to move that up to $20,000, so that there's no marriage penalty for SALT. And I think NAR will find ways to attack it in different forms. But unfortunately, with this president, this isn't a take on this president overall, just in this particular segment. we don't have support in that area, and so it would take a change in leadership, I think, to see any of those take effect. I know most Democrats in the House are for what we're pushing for, but there's not a lot of Republican support at this point. So. Yeah, they are. They're on the website, so you can click them from there. Yeah. Any other questions? All right. Thank you.